moving on back to where we were. I'm going to just share the screen. Okay, great. So the letter C, when paired with the letter I, will also sound like an S. Let's look at an example. We have this word, which is pronounced cisne, cisne, okay? So the C with the I, C, okay? And then cisne. So all you have to remember, how does the letter C sound in Spanish? Well, when we pair the letter C with an A or an O, it's going to sound like a K, okay? And we use the examples of coco and cana, okay? And then when the letter C is paired with the letter E or the letter I, then it's going to sound like an S. So we have the words cebra and cisne. All right, and then we also talked about CU should have a K sound. So cuaderno, cuaderno. Okay, now there's another little fact here is that in Latin America, okay, that would be all the countries in your hemisphere where you are, which would be Mexico, Guatemala, all of Central America, all the way down to South America with Chile, Colombia, all these countries. This is how the sounds are going to be. There is one exception, which would be in the country of Spain. Now, you don't need to know this, but since I live in Spain, my pronunciation, I've adapted it just a bit to how they pronounce here. So the letter C, for example, sometimes will sound like a TH. Okay, so sometimes maybe you'll hear me say something that maybe sounds like that. So like with the word cisne, okay, they would pronounce it cisne, okay, like a TH. But you don't have to know that. You don't have to do it. I'm just letting you know that the letter C in Spanish, when it's paired with the letter E or the letter I, it's going to sound like a TH. So I'll just put that here, TH in Spain, okay? But you don't have to know that. Probably make it easier for you. And the reason is, like I said, here sometimes people maybe act like they don't understand if you don't pronounce it the way they have it pronounced here, which is the reason that I've changed it. Okay, so moving on. That was a lot about the letter C, and then now we're going to talk about the letter G, okay? So the letter G will be similar to what we've already talked about. So give me just a moment and I will set that up. So the letter G will sound like the G in English, okay, when the letter is paired with the letter A. So the G will sound like the G, like the letter G when the letter G is paired with A, okay? So let's see what that sounds like. So the letter G when it is paired with the letter A. Okay? So let's see an example. GANSO will be ganso, okay? Now, same thing will happen when paired with the letter O. Okay, so when paired with the letter the G will sound like the G in English. Let's look at an example. Okay, so when the G is paired with an O, gominola. Okay? So that'll be the next thing that you would have to remember. And then going down to when the letter G is paired with the letter E, it's going to sound like an H. So that would, let's look at this word here. It is not pronounced gente or gente. It's pronounced gente. Gente. So G when paired with an E sounds like an H. The G when paired with the letter I will also sound like the letter H. So let's look at an example. Let's see. All right. So the word G with an I is not gitano. It's not gitano. It's gitano. Gitano. Okay? Which is a gypsy. So gitano. All right? And then the G with the U, the letter G, when paired with the letter U, will sound a bit like a W. Okay, let's look at this word. It's a country. In English, we might say it Guatemala, but in Spanish, it's Guatemala. Guatemala. Okay? Now, I don't expect anyone to have perfect pronunciation, but to just follow these rules. Okay? So, like, I wouldn't want anyone to say Guatemala. Okay? It would be Guatemala. Okay? For the purposes of the class. All right, so I'm just going to clean things up a bit. Un momento. Vale. Muy bien. Okay, perfecto. Muy bien. So we have talked about the different letters that there are. Keeping in mind, we've talked about how the letter C and the G work. Those are kind of the most difficult ones. And then now we have about 6 or 7 more that we're going to talk about. But all the rest will sound like English, okay? Except for the vowels and then the other ones that we've talked about. All right, bien. Okay, un segundito. Vale. All right, so what are the other letters that are exceptions? That are not like English. Okay, so let's talk about these. The first one we would have is the letter H. Now, the letter H in Spanish is H. We'll talk about the alphabet probably tomorrow. But the letter H in Spanish, we're only talking about the sounds, okay? Not the letters. The letter H is silent, okay? So one of the things that makes your Spanish sound really terrible is when you pronounce the H and it should not be pronounced. Let's look at a couple of examples. Okay. For example, if you have this word that everybody knows, hola, okay? We don't say hola or hala, it's hola, okay? Or if you have the word for man, hombre, hombre, okay? Let's look at another letter. What about the letter J? The letter J sounds like an H, okay? The H is silent. However, the letter J is our H sound. Okay, so for example, if you have this word, let's see. All right, it's not jinete, it's jinete. J sounds like H. Let's see, any other J words? Soap. Okay, the word soap is pronounced jabón. Yesterday we talked about those accent marks, where since we have an accent mark over the O, it's not haben or jabon, it's jabón. Okay, and we do pronounce it, one moment. And we do pronounce it as I mentioned. All right, let's go to the next letter that we have. So J will sound like an H. All right, now Spanish also has some letters that we don't have in English, and one of those is the LY. So when you see two L's, the double L is pronounced like a Y. Okay? So if you think about my last name, you'll see a lot of the rules that we've just talked about. Okay? Remember, G when paired with an A or an O is going to sound like English. G, ga. Okay? The first syllable of my last name, ga. And then if you look at the last three letters, it's gos. Okay? So what happens? I have a double L in my name, which in the United States, people would pronounce it gallegos, lots of different ways, but it's gallegos, gallegos. So a double L is going to always sound like a Y. If you had the word llama, okay, this is how we pronounce it in English, but in Spanish, it's pronounced llama, okay? It's not spelled that way, but it's pronounced as a Y, okay? Another letter that Spanish has that we do not have in English is the letter ñ. The ñ, okay, notice it has a little squiggly mark over the N. Whenever you see that little tilde over an N, you're going to pronounce it like NY. Okay, so for example, think of the word canyon. So when you pronounce canyon, you've got the ñ sound. Okay, however, in Spanish, it's going to be spelled like this. Cañón, cañón. So we're putting the stress on that O, cañón. Okay, just a couple more letters. We've got the letter Q. All right, now the Q will almost always, un momento, the letter Q will almost always be paired with the letter U. Okay? Therefore, the pronunciation is like a K in English. Let's look at some words. All right? This QUE is not Q or que, it's K. All right? Let's look at another example. QUIEN. This word, the QU sounds like K. Quien. Quien. Quien is how we pronounce the word. So when you don't know, just break it into syllables. Qui, all right, or quien. Quien. All right. Just a couple more. Spanish also has a sound which is the double R. Now this is the hardest one for most English speakers to do because you have to kind of roll that R for a little bit of time. So the R sounds like a regular R. Let's look at an example. R-A-T-O-N, raton, okay, which is a mouse. Vale? Now, if you had the word C-A-R-R-O, then you kind of hold that R a little bit if you can. I don't expect anybody to do this well and perfectly, but it would be pronounced carro, ro, ro, ro. That's the sound that it makes. So, carro. All right, but I don't expect that part to be perfect. It's very subtle, like raton is just really quick, and then carro. Okay, so don't expect anybody to roll the R's, but that is the other sound. And then the last sound that we have is the letter Z. The letter Z will sound like an S. So we do not have in Spanish the Z sound, like zoo, zebra, zipper. Those sounds do not exist in Spanish. It's always going to sound like S, like the S. So let's look at an example. Maybe some of you know this word, which means shoe. Zapato, zapato. Okay, so I didn't say zapato or zapato, zapato, zapato. Okay, now just you don't have to know this, but the other little tidbit in Spain, the Z will be pronounced like a TH as well. Okay, but in Spain only, and not in the Spanish islands. But so the word zapato would be zapato. Okay, but it's just something to be aware of in case you ever talk to someone, they might pronounce things differently. And that is it. So that concludes the lesson for today about the sounds of Spanish. And now what we're going to do is a little bit of practice and dictation so that you can see how much you've learned. Vale? Ciao.